are, when I look at Africa, I see a lot of untapped potential. For example, I see, I see a country, a continent that has the potential to be a wealthy nation. They are rich in, natural resources, but like you're saying, they are exporting these in their most raw form. I know that Africa is very rich in, minerals, oil, things like that. But like you're saying, they're only exporting it through the forms of crude oil. And by going to what you were saying about the political class, I do think it is fruitful to ask why it is that Africa is in this particular economic position. And, there have been plenty of theories that have been laid out about this, from imperialism to war to racism, and somehow to capitalism and the free market as a cause of this poverty. And I've noticed that it seems that a lot of these accusations have been made without any real effort made to flesh them out. And we can point to examples of just disastrous leadership in a lot of these African countries, such as Idi Amin in Uganda and Robert Mugabe in Zimbabwe. In fact, I know in Idi Amin's case, for example, he actually established an economic crimes tribunal back in the mid 1970s that would outright punish, its own citizens for acting against the economic interests of the Ugandan government. Citizens would be executed in a lot of cases, or they'd be imprisoned for 10 years or above for selling goods at prices that did not align with the government's price controls. But, my overall point in mentioning this is that we can point to, terrible policies in certain nations, but, Africa is naturally an entire continent. So, beyond, rentier economics, like you were saying, rentier economics, what case would you make for the economic plight across the African continent, historically, going back centuries? What exactly would you attribute this to? Do you think role do you think imperialism or war or any of these other, claims that are made, what significance do you think they have in this economic predicament?
Yeah, I mean, I stick to my argument around economics because if African countries were able to transform the commodities that they're exporting, you will see that we will have a very strong domestic private sector. The difference between advanced countries and poor countries is that advanced countries have a strong domestic. That's all. That's literally what it is. That's literally what it is. What made the United States the greatest country in the world, economically speaking, is because the United States started transforming, industrializing its economy. If you do not industrialize your economy, it doesn't matter. Yes, we have all the natural resources we want. If we even know that we have those natural resources because white people are the ones who discovered that. Those natural resources have been there for thousands of years. Africans didn't know. Okay? When people come and say, oh yeah, you have uranium in Niger. Nigerians have been there, they didn't know they have uranium. When they come and say, oh, you have oil in Nigeria, Nigerians didn't know they had oil until white people went and explored the Nigerian ground and found oil. So the point is to say that Africa, so long as we will, whether it's capitalism or socialism, until we transform, until we process our commodities into finished products before selling them on the global market, we will be poor. That's the rule, because there are some African countries that have embraced capitalism too. Don't get me wrong. The country I'm from, Ivory Coast, it has embraced capitalism. It was, in fact, among the most economically advanced countries in the 1960s and 70s, because all the countries around Ivory Coast, so Mali, Burkina Faso, Ghana, at the time of Kwame Nkrumah, Liberia, all of them, they were pretty much socialist. Ivory Coast is the country that went for capitalism. So when you look at the income per capita of Ivory Coast in the 1960s and 70s compared to the income per capita of Mali and Burkina Faso and all these countries, we had higher income per capita. Nevertheless, we still relied on rentier economics, right? It's just that, thank God, the economic system we had did not try to control prices or, try to impose like socialist policies, but we still relied on rentier economics. So rentier economics is a true poison for the continent, because until we create factories that will transform, that will process raw commodities into finished consumable products, we will be poor, because when we're able to industrialize the country, that's when we will create more jobs. We will create local champions, so local entrepreneurs that take economic matters in their hands. That's why we will create a true domestic and productive sector. Until then, whether we have capitalism or socialism, it doesn't matter. Because, for example, ask any person who likes Gaddafi. They will say, oh, Gaddafi was a great leader. Under his leadership, the income per capita of Libyans was almost as high as that of the United States. That is true. But why? It's not because Gaddafi had great policies. It's because at the time, the price of oil was high. That's all. Because Libya relied on oil, crude oil. The Libyans did not refine oil. They were selling crude oil the way it was. The same thing happened in Venezuela with Hugo Chavez. When Chavez took power at first, the living standard of Venezuelans was pretty high because the price of oil was high. That's all. But then when the price of oil tanked, the entire economy collapsed. This is not a way to lead a country. This is not a way to develop a country. You cannot let your country, you cannot let your society depend on an asset you do not control. In the United States, in advanced countries, they're advanced because they create businesses. A business is an asset you control, right? Even let's take, for example, hedge fund managers. A hedge fund focuses on financial markets. Most hedge fund managers invest in stocks. Nevertheless, stocks are assets you don't control. At the end of the day, you put your money, you hold that, well, they will reach the moon. But the hedge fund itself is a business that the hedge fund manager, who is the founder of the business, controls. That's why you have someone like Ken Griffin, who is a billionaire. Ken Griffin would have never been a billionaire if he just put directly his money into the stock market. He became a billionaire because he owns a hedge fund, which is a business he has full control over, so he can make decisions on how to make their investments because he has full control over that. So having a business enables you to have full control over the asset that you created for yourself. And that's why advanced countries are advanced, because they create businesses. But in African countries, in Latin American countries, they prevent people from creating businesses. And that's where now the difference between socialism and capitalism comes into play. Because most African countries went for socialism. So therefore, they abolish or reduce access to property. They don't want people to create businesses. Whereas countries that went for capitalism created businesses. So because they created businesses, they were able to increase productivity, they were able to increase output, and that improved the living standard of society in general.
So in that case, would you attribute, a lot of Africa's current economic situation to perhaps a shortage of labor, or perhaps a misallocation of that labor in some case?
I would say misallocation of labor, because the reason I say misallocation is because the African continent has talent, but because it lacks the infrastructure, most of the talent goes study abroad and doesn't come back. So that's a misallocation here, because those who went to study abroad and acquired the knowledge, they could go back and use their knowledge to develop the continent. But they stay here because they say, hey, those guys, they're corrupt, you will try, there's no opportunity, there are no opportunities anyways. What's the point? I'd rather stay here where there are more opportunities. And that's true. And that has been, for example, my case. I remember at first, I wanted to go back. So the initial reason why I came to the United States was to study politics and then go back and then do politics back home. That was when I used to think that politics was the solution to improve a nation's welfare. But then when I became accustomed to economics, I realized that politics is not the way to improve a nation's welfare. The way to improve a nation's welfare is free market, entrepreneurship, let people create businesses, because when they create businesses, they understand the value of what they own, so they will take care of it and try to do a better job. So when I realized that, I changed my mind, and I was like, there is no point. So I'm one of those people who unfortunately came and did not go back, because I personally lost faith in the advancement of the continent. Because African societies are structured as a top-down society. We expect those at the top to lead and to create opportunities for those who are down, right? The general population. But when those at the top refuse to make themselves accountable, and this is one other issue besides rentier economics, one other issue is that the rule of law is not instilled in African culture. That's one of the issues. We don't put the laws above people. We put people above the law. So it creates a very uneven distribution of justice. If you're born into a poor family, well, yes, you're going to go to jail if you commit a crime. But if you're born into a rich family, you can buy off the judges, you can buy off the police, you can buy off the detective, the military, whatever. But here in the United States, don't get me wrong, it's not perfect too. Like, people who are very wealthy, they still get their ways around justice. But at least they pretend, because they try to follow the judicial process. They're trying to bring the person through the judicial process, right? Like, you arrest the guy, you perhaps put him, he goes before the judge makes bail. If he has the money to make bail, well, he's not going to go to jail, right? He's going to stay home until Judgment Day. He goes, takes his trial, and even if he takes the trial and is found guilty, the judge can send him to a federal prison or to a state prison, or the judge say, "House, you're going to be in prison in your own home." That depends. On the discretion of the judge. But the point is to say that at least in the United States, what they do is to put even the rich through the judicial process. While in Africa, it's not even like that. So and because here in the United States, we respect the rule of law. Whereas there, the rule of law is not inculcated in people's culture or in people's personality.